All right, I think we can get started. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Aram Moshayedi. I'm one of the curators of the museum, and technically speaking, I'm the Robert Soros curator of the Hammer. And this is a weekly series, as many of you know, focusing on works in the collection where Hammer curators discuss specific objects that are more often than not on view. This series will focus on artists featured in Made in LA, a version. Free reservations to visit the Hammer are now available. Visit our website to reserve your time to see our biennial, now open at the Hammer Museum and the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens in Pasadena. Today, as I mentioned, my name is Aram Moshayedi, and I'm going to be speaking on the work of Hedi El Kholti. After the presentation, I will be able to answer the questions that you might have. A few Zoom notes before we begin. When the presentation starts, please select Speaker View. In the top right corner of your screen and in the top middle of your screen, please click on View Options to ensure side by side and Fit to Window are checked. I feel like I should also check that. Please note that today's program is being recorded. You have the option to toggle your camera on or off using the camera icon in the bottom left corner, whatever you're most comfortable with. You will remain on mute until the end of the presentation, at which point I will unmute those who have questions. During the presentation, if you have any questions for me or any technical issues, you can ask those using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So with that, is it possible, Keen, to pull up the slides? Great, thank you. Okay. In an otherwise undated, untitled zine, seemingly edited and organized by Hedi El Kholti, a collaged image appears on page 7. I use the word seemingly because in the spirit of a zine, as a potent and informal literary device, there are few to any identifying details included throughout its pages. El Kholti is credited as a translator, and a text attributed to him appears where a postscript might otherwise appear. But there is no colophon, there is no title page, there is no table of contents, there is no list of illustrated works, there is no caption or distinguishing information for the image in question. These are the publishing protocols we have come to expect. Next slide, please. We have come to expect from our more official channels, but none of the items I've just listed can be found in the pages of this curious zine. Even the most rookie reader could, however, decipher that the zine is the product of a compulsion that is tireless, desirous, and laborious, 3 words that aptly describe its contents and its maker, Hedi El Kholti, an import to Los Angeles in 1992, originally from Rabat, Morocco. And I failed to mention at the beginning that this is a love letter to Hedi. The unnamed zine in question offers its readers for the first time the English translation of René Schrer and Guy Hockendem's first chapter of Co-Ir, Album Systématique de l'Enfance, Co-Anger, Systematic Album of Childhood, the English translation, first published by the French philosophers in their native language in 1976. From what I have been able to decipher elsewhere, El Kholti's translation is the only extant read of the text in English, though the zine makes no attempt to advertise or sell itself as such. Sometimes things just need to happen. Information needs to be shared at its most expedient, but also at its most strategically surgical, albeit limited rate of distribution. Not everything, for instance, has to be advertised, broadcast, liked, retweeted, or express virality to have value in this world. Without knowing this information, El Kholti's compulsion to share Scherer's and Hockenheim's text is restrained, I would venture to say, by a print run of no fewer than 25 and no more than 100 handmade copies, and how few of even those copies might eventually make their way into libraries or archives, assuming such institutions will still exist in the future when their temporary custodians, avid readers, hoarders, and the downtrodden and degraded class of writers, those whose works and collecting habits will, only if they are of the fortunate few, see themselves interred there. And for anyone who doesn't kind of follow that long sentence, the argument I'm trying to make is that not every writer can be as lucky to be as pseudoscientific and as mediocre and as effectively canonized as someone, say, Malcolm Gladwell. Admittedly, in preparation for today's talk, I was fortunate enough to have access to El Kholti's zine because I have committed myself to this life of love. I have committed myself to those few who think collecting and preserving important documents such as this, as rarefied or inaccessible as they sometimes may be, is their burden to carry, despite a culture that tells them otherwise. In that spirit, it is worth quoting an excerpt from El Kholti's translation of Scherer and Hockenheim's Coir, which is often described in short form, and my apologies here for the cliff notes, as an examination of childhood sexuality from a Marxist perspective. And I quote, "We are prone towards revelation, and particularly the revelation of childhood. We didn't look behind the screen. We only wanted to let images glide on the page, not in turn to expose the constellation in full brightness, but to keep it in an adequate twilight. We systematically took the stance of suggesting rather than explaining, in the hope that our enterprise will find accomplices." As a recent inheritor of these words, and as someone who has been fortunate to witness El Kholti's contributions to writing and publishing, editing and translation, and watering hole programming, through unofficial channels such as the one containing these words, and in his capacity as a co-editor of Semiotext, the Los Angeles-based publisher of critical theory, philosophy, and art criticism, I too want images to glide on the page. I too want to keep and to be kept in an adequate twilight, and I too find the value in suggesting rather than explaining. So let me now try to offer some suggestions towards the collaged image that appears on page 7 of El Kholti's zine, as we witness it glide from one context to another, from a cut and paste original to a Xerox copy, to an offset print page insert in a catalog, to a poster in the galleries of a museum. There are two visual references that situate the contents of this image in a historical time frame specific to the 1980s, even if its production is surely decades later. David Bowie, from the era of his 1980 release Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, is poised at center, an off-kilter Harlequin icon as he appeared in the music video for the song Ashes to Ashes. Revisiting Bowie's lyrics, this precarious figure at center is something of a visual palimpsest. Ashes to ashes, funk to funky, we know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low. Bowie continues with foreboding choral closure. My mother said to get things done, you'd better not mess with Major Tom. Bowie as Harlequin, a junkie in disguise, our Major Tom crush, whose return from far above the world, far above the moon, is met with all the pain and suffering of lived experience in the reality of sordid detail. Bowie's left heel beautifully delicately slips from a silver leather flat as he tips his toes forward on a barren, snowy landscape. Towering over him, a monstrous amalgamation of horror, alluding to blood and gore and terror of an unknown shape-shifting entity. The ground of El Kholti's collage is taken from a movie poster for the French language release of John Carpenter's 1982 horror sci-fi masterpiece, The Thing. The words above, Jusqu'au bout de la terreur, loosely translated into English as Until the End of Terror or Deep into Terror, float and glide between the poster as artifact, as movie memorabilia, and the image as a complex web of associative meaning. Here on page 7 of El Kholti's untitled zine, the collage appears in relation to the translated words of Scherer and Hockenheim's disembodied from the authors and translators' original intent. A personalized, edited selection of words on preceding page 6 serve as a series of illicit captions. So I'll read these illicit captions from the preceding page. Abduction, dreams, preyed upon, street acrobats, distant figures, quivering body, father, haunted, demonic power, beautiful children, Britain, tepidness of the home, terrifying, conjuring, absence, indivisible, superficial freedom, vagrancy, dread. Our epoch is lenient with runaways, eventual return, double-edged, safety. This is the lexical atmosphere of the adjoining image as it appears in Xerox form, bound simply by 2 staples. The date of the image's appearance in this form is likely to fall sometime after or near spring 2017, as evidenced by a collage that appears elsewhere in the zine. Next slide, please. An advertisement for Christopher Williams' exhibition at David's Warner in London, Open Letter, the family drama refunctioned from the point of view of production, on view from March 17th to May 20th, 2017, being the giveaway. A cross-section view of a flayed camera appearing here in excruciatingly close proximity to its terrorized subject. Paired with another of El Kholti's movie memories, the Williams camera shares intimate psychic space with a filmic genre otherwise absent from the discourse surrounding the original artwork. I would never mean to imply Williams a kind of post-conceptual peeping Tom, but Kholti's suggestion here casts the artist's work in perversion, just as the protagonist, Mark Lewis, played by Carl Boehm in the 1960 film Peeping Tom, automates his camera with a customized knife synchronized with the device's shutter to perfectly marry representation and death into wedded bliss. El Kholti, for his part, shows the same union in a vernacular that is familiar and strange all the same. Next slide. Leaving the zine and the period of time in which it first debuted in the world, Bowie and The Thing appear again in the pages of the catalog representing the exhibition at hand. The year is now 2020, or at least it was supposed to have been. The image is full color, offset print, and insert into the catalog pages in a sequence and format all its own. The image is one of 19 collages that form the basis of El Kholti's visual contribution to the catalog. But Bowie has been divorced from the words of Scherer and Hockenheim in this instance. Instead, an adjacent movie poster, presumably for the American release, announces John Carpenter's The Thing, coming this summer to a theater near you. The tagline is circa 1980s, that distant time when theaters were nearer than they are now. It is reminiscent of something I read recently by Wayne Kostenbaum, who in a private correspondence with a mutual friend offered the lines, "I come to touch, I come without touching, I touch in order to come." The clipping of homoerotic desire that sandwiches itself between the fissure of the thing and the impending coming this summer offers more than explanation, even more than suggestion. It offers a place in the sun, a place in adequate twilight that glides in equal measure. And no matter what your sexual orientation might be, the line above, man is the warmest place to hide, is enticing to say the least. Next slide, please. And here, finally, at least for the purposes of today, David Bowie glides into the galleries of a museum, printed in poster form, available as a columnar offering, free for the taking, just as the late Felix Gonzalez Torres reimagined property and ownership in the pristine, touchless space of exhibitions. The pile is discreet and unassuming. El Kholti's original gesture taking on new meanings, new associations, new correlations, and new comparisons in this context. It has taken next slide, please. It has taken a number of distinct methods of distributive forms for this image to make its way into the Hammer Museum. But at least for the time being, it is where its contents can live and circulate among and adjacent to other artistic works of this historical moment. It is a place where this image might disperse itself well beyond the exhibition and the world that David Bowie was so in need of leaving for another better one. So, can I have the last slide, please? I'm happy to answer any questions. That was like quick and rough, and I apologize for a bit of a rocky read, but hopefully you gleaned something, and I can check the chat and see if there's any questions, but so far, I think we're okay. Oh. Lisa, let me figure out how to unmute you. Does that work? Oh.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Yes. I really don't understand the presentation.
Great.
What exactly is the visitor going to see at the Hammer of what you were talking about? So if I'm correct, what you're talking about is you're reading somebody's description of a pamphlet or some kind of handout. And so what is the viewer going to see when they go to the Hammer?
It was the last image of the pile of posters that is shown on this kind of low plinth. And otherwise, Hedi's contribution to the exhibition exists in the catalog for the Made in LA exhibition. So those are your kind of two places to encounter it. There's also one of the catalogs that's being included in the presentation at the museum, where the pages of the sequence of images changes from day to day.
So if you visit, you get a catalog?
No, I mean, you do if you go to the store and buy it.
You have to buy the catalog.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. And I don't understand why it's been given such importance. Because you have the writer, El Kholti. That's the writer?
Hedi El Kholti, yes.
Hedi,
I mean, he's the creator of the zine and the creator of the poster that's exhibited in the show. Okay. So it's being given importance because it's a contribution to the exhibition and it's what we do.
I see, but I just don't understand. It's nowhere presented as a proper piece of art.
I suppose if that's your question, I think it's for you to answer. I mean, I can't tell you what a proper piece of art is. I can tell you.
No, but I mean, in a traditional sense, like it's not presented as a poster. It's not presented. It's not. I mean, I just don't understand why he's gotten so much importance. Like with this presentation and stuff like that. I just don't understand what warrants it.
Maybe you should ask Banksy about it. What makes art like relevant and materially important to our time, right? Like maybe that's a question that you should ask, as Aram is saying, maybe you should ask that question to yourself, I think.
Yeah, well, I just want to understand um, the logic and how this came to be a presentation at all, and I just don't know why was this chosen.
I think
What make an argument to me why you think this is so relevant and so important.
That's a great point to make. I mean, I would say that, you know, the context of these talks, or the premise of these talks, is that we're providing a bit of kind of context or insight into works of art that are on view. I mean, I think maybe part of your question can be answered by, you know, your eventual visit to the museum, hopefully, if that can take place. But in terms of decisions that are made, you know, I don't really understand. I mean, I think your question is like, why do we get to determine what's on view in the galleries of the museum? Or
no, I just want to know why you think this is so relevant to the show. Why what
okay,
inspired you about it?
Well, I didn't
What are
curate
the people
the
who chose
exhibition.
this to?
So I didn't curate the exhibition, but
Okay.
I'm someone who has, you know, witnessed the work of Hedi in Los Angeles for the period of time that I've lived here, which is since 2004. I've seen his contribution in a literary way, but also in as a member of a kind of community of artists and writers who have shaped the identity of the city. And I actually think that the work that is being presented in this exhibition is unique in the fact that he's not someone who is known as a visual artist. And so even the fact that he is kind of taking something that is a deeply personal and intimate part of his practice that exists, you know, primarily for himself, but that has been in the past a visual complement to his writing and to the writing of others, that has really been distributed to very few people in an inner circle, that he's now making a kind of different gesture with that work, and that it's on view in a very public way, in a way that everything else that preceded it was quite private in relative comparison. That to me is interesting. Whether or not you look at the image and you find anything compelling into it, I think it's about seeing it in context. It's seeing it in the context of Hedi as an individual, as a contributor. It's seeing it in the context of the museum. It's seeing it in the context of itself, both as a contribution and the 19 other images of which it's a part. It's seeing it in the context of your own point of view as someone who has a hesitancy and resistance towards things that are maybe unfamiliar to you. And all of that is the context through which I hope you look at works of art, and with openness rather than being closed off from them. And I think that's what the purpose of this talk is to actually, hopefully, and either in this context or next week at the same time, that it opens something up. And that's all we're trying to do. I think we should, if we can, I would love to talk to you offline, but if there are any other questions, it'd be nice to give someone else the opportunity. Let's see, anything?
Could I ask you about the wallpaper image?
The wallpaper image. Which one is that? I'm sorry.
Is there not a wallpaper image by the artist on one of
Oh, yes. I mean, you're right. And it's something I think I didn't touch upon. It's like one of the other ways that this imagery has kind of taken on a different life beyond itself. I think for the purposes of this, I really wanted to focus specifically on this one singular collage and its life, but the others that have been enlarged at the Hammer, I think in 2 locations, you know, much in the same way, are pulling from these different sources that are both from, you know, Hollywood, kind of the genre of horror and science fiction films, but also paired with art references. And so, seeing them together in that way, it gives you a sense of a different scale of presentation, and it's different kind of bodily encounter that one might have with them. But you're right, I should have mentioned that in relationship to this as like another life of this type of imagery.
Thank you.
Nicole L asks, is there something particular to the imagery that is grounded in a sense of place, such as Los Angeles? I mean, I think that the cliche in some way that we have inherited, that Hollywood or that filmmaking or movies is a particularly Los Angeles or Hollywood phenomenon, is one that has largely been eroded. Though I would say, perhaps Hedi's interest in that type of visual material it's one among many forms of visual culture that kind of enter into it. And it's not specifically Los Angeles as a place of film production, because less and less that's actually becoming less and less the case, but how these things kind of actually figure into a kind of visual cultural landscape that is much broader than Los Angeles can ever really contain. So I think if that's it, thank you.
Lauren Mackler has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't see
Sorry,
that.
I didn't want to interfere.
Oh no, I don't see you. I don't know how I would know that.
I'm over here. First, I really want to thank you for this presentation, because I think what you did is really pick one one specific piece of Hedi's work, and you sort of pulled it into all these different platforms, which I think is part of what Miriam Ike and I really saw in Hedi's work. And for everyone else here, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm one of the 3 curators of Made in LA. So I was part of the process that sort of we met Hedi and we sort of invited Hedi to be a part of this. But I think, Aram, your presentation is so touching because it also really embodies the way in which Hedi plays a role in the community in Los Angeles. So I think that also is something that we see in today's presentation. But to speak to some of the questions earlier, Hedi's work appears in so many different ways to be really a mirror of the very many mediums that Hedi himself uses, the very many platforms that Hedi uses, including writing, collage making, curating film, because we're doing a series of programs with him as well, but also this kind of larger idea of distribution, which I think you pointed to really well, with this idea that his work appears in the intimate pages of a zine, but then also as a stack of posters that can be pulled from and taken away, but also at this kind of large scale on the wall and sort of in an architectural way. So I guess it's not necessarily a question, except to maybe sort of recenter back onto your presentation, Aram, and say that I really understand the kind of way in which you've articulated your thoughts around this. And, maybe there's anything else that you want to pull to.
I want to say that I'm sorry that I didn't adequately introduce this talk in relationship to Made in LA. I think that I'm in the mindset that it's been with us, now, and I think, so I apologize also if that wasn't clear to anyone. Also to credit Lauren, Miriam Bensala, and Ike Onyuenye as the co-curators of this exhibition. But I would also say, Lauren, thank you for this opportunity to, talk about this work, because in some senses, I would say that this singular collage was like something of a fragment, which within a much larger whole, not only of Hedi's own output, but within the kind of wider network of what the exhibition is. And so it was really enlightening for me to focus on this one small aspect within the exhibition to actually understand many of the other things that you're and the other curators are interested in pursuing. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Aram.
All right, everybody, have a great day. I want to say before we go, thank you for joining. Special thanks to Bank of America for presenting Made in LA 2020 A version. To support programs like this and future programs, we invite you to become a Hammer member or donate to the museum by visiting hammer.ucla.edu/support. Be sure to join us next week for Aaron Cristoval's lunchtime art talk on Made in LA artist Alexandra Noel. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.